All right, a happy Wednesday evening. Hopefully, everyone is doing terrific out there, especially if you are a Oklahoma City Thunder fan. Congratulations to making it to the NBA Finals. We are going to do a Minnesota Timberwolves offseason article. They are team number 27. Wow, we're almost there. As far as articles that we have up on ESPN.com and certainly the videos, and we will continually doing more of the lottery teams. I know I'm neglecting some of those lottery teams here, but we are going to do a Timberwolves offseason article. It was funny when Oklahoma City was up. I don't even know, it was 40. I texted my editor and I said, I think I might want to change the intro to the article and or the state of the roster. And then I read it and I was like, well, it's not overly positive. I mean, it's not like bells and whistles on there. It's pretty much plain Jane. So I would say like these type of things when you get your doors blown off in an elimination game and in a conference finals, there's always like we live in this world right now. It's really interesting where whenever a team loses in this way, it's always, and maybe this will happen with New York, and their offseason article is written. It's always fire the coach and go trade for Giannis or trade for Kevin Durant. We live in this like knee jerk reaction where it always has to be like, okay, maybe it was a good year and maybe we just have to tweak some things here. So Minnesota, when you look at from where they were after the Karl-Anthony Towns trade to where they finished, and I know we have to include Game 5. There was a point in the season where this team was 21-19. There was a point in the season where we thought the Randall mix or the Randall with the starting five did not work. There was this point in the season where we probably thought that this team maybe doesn't even get out of a play-in tournament. And lo and behold, they go 17-4 down the stretch, and they beat certainly. And this is kind of an interesting thing. I think it shows you that, and I know Curry was out in the Golden State series, that you beat two aging teams, two older teams with the Lakers in Golden State, and you ran into a buzzsaw in Oklahoma City that is a much better team than you are. They were certainly in those first two games at home. They were certainly in that Game 5 to eliminate you, and we saw an epic Game 4, and that basically kind of knocked the wind out of the sails here. So where do we go now? Okay. This is going to be an interesting offseason for I'm going to say Oklahoma City, for Minnesota here. First, you've got a new ownership group led by Mark Lore and Alex Rodriguez. You've seen them sitting under the basket. You've seen them up front. It's going to be interesting as far as where their fingerprints are going to be on this roster. You've got 13 players under contract. Okay, so you basically have the bulk of this roster under contract. Two of those players are Julius Randle and Naz Reid. We're going to talk about them in a minute. Both of those have player options here. One of your free agents is Nickeil Alexander-Walker. We're going to talk about him in a minute here. I would just say this, that you're going to see this roster that finished in the conference finals is going to look a little bit differently here because it's not going to be sustainable. And to bring back Alexander Walker and pay $250 million and be a second apron team again. That's not what's going to happen. And I'm going to explain a little bit why and what Minnesota has coming down the pike here. So a little bit about the finances. As far as the Towns trade did balance this roster better financially. I thought basketball wise, certainly when you had DiVincenzo, Reed, Alexander Walker, and then you add certainly Terrence Shannon, who we will talk about in a minute here. And you have the flexibility now to be a little bit more aggressive. You're still a tax team next year. You are under the second apron, including both those guys' options. Let's say if Reed and Randall opt in and the first round pick, you're about $11 million below below that second apron. So you can go out and spend a little bit here if you wanted to, and you have the flexibility from a trade standpoint, but it will cost you Alexander Walker. You've got some team options with Josh Minot and Luca Garza. The Randall and Reed options are June 29th. 15 million and 29.5. I'm not, it's going to look like, I think 30.5, but he's got likely bonuses there. I'm not going to factor him in right now. All right. So here's your priority. Okay. And here's the question we open with. Will the Timberwolves be forced to choose between retaining Randall Reed and Alexander Walker? The answer could play a pivotal part in how Minnesota's roster is shaped next season and future years. I would say this regarding Randall and Reed, and I'm not using sourced information. You're just kind of looking at the tea leaves of of what this summer is going to look like financially. And I'm going to put out some graphics in a couple weeks where I basically have tiered all 30 teams into 4 tiers, and it shows you basically Brooklyn's on an island by themselves and everybody else is kind of in that middle area. And that is going to play a significant role, what's going to happen with Julius Randle and Naz Reid. I would say it would be highly likely, okay, and this is just me looking at the financial landscape, that both players opt into their contract. Julius Randle is not making $30 million on the open market. That ain't happening unless it's going to be with Minnesota on a new contract or opting in. Naz Reid is a little bit different. He's at 15 million. It's hard for me to see him taking the non-tax mid-level exception at $14.1 million. I don't see that. And it's a pay cut. And if you're him, why would you want to commit long-term when you could potentially get a long-term deal with Minnesota? The other thing too, and it's a good lesson, especially for agents who are maybe watch this, and we've talked a lot to agents, leaving your own team to go become a free agent, it's like the land of the unknown. And the only way that these 2 players will decline their options is basically if it's going to be with new deals with Minnesota, maybe at a number that's more manageable, certainly for Randall. As I said, the Reed number is at $15 million. We don't need to go into the stats of Randall, kind of all over the place this year. Certainly really good in the first 2 rounds. This series was a roller coaster. Reed, certainly one of the better 6 men. Really good numbers, certainly last year winning it, and then this year. I think the scenarios for both players, you're going to opt in. You're going to opt in and extend potentially. You're going to opt out and maybe sign a new contract. I think there are certainly the sign and trade scenarios that you could look at. I think there's also certainly opting in and then being traded scenarios. I think those are certainly things that you have to discuss. I think there's 2 things that Minnesota needs to consider, that nearly half the league's going to have cap space next year. So although you have leverage this offseason, you're going to run into an issue with next year where half the league will have these guys probably on top of their free agent board. And then the other thing is that you've got 110 million tied up in Edwards, McDaniels, and Gobert, as Perk says, in 2026-27. So how much are you willing to commit? And that's where you're basically might have to choose what you're going to bring back here. So keep an eye on as far as what's going to happen with both those players. I would say the likelihood is that, I think for Randall, if the goal is to resign, you opt in, and then you secure longer. I know he's 30 years old and he's looking for that big payday, but he's probably your 3rd best player on a championship team. I just look at him that way. And I think, so there are certainly those scenarios as far as opting in and then extending off that. Randall is eligible for, and he's not going to get this, but if he opted in, 4 for 194. My screen just jumped. Reed can sign for 4 for 87, starting on June 27th. Okay, so we opt in for 4 for 87. Both players got bird rights if they became free agents. Here's the thing with Alexander Walker, and I was gonna comment during the season series and stuff. You've got Terrence Shannon waiting in the wings. Terrence Shannon Jr. waiting in the wings. He is basically your Nickeil Alexander-Walker replacement. You have the 17th pick in the draft, and you have the 31st pick in the draft. You got 2 picks in the top 31. You got to nail the draft, because what's going to happen is that when you have Edwards and McDaniels and Gobert, as Perk says, and you bring back Julius Randle, your expenses are getting up there. So you need your young players, Terrence Shannon Jr. You need Rob Dillingham, because Mike Conley Jr. is about to go into the last year of his contract. He is likely the heir apparent, the replacement to Conley Jr. You need your young players to develop into high-level rotational players for this Minnesota team to have sustainable success moving forward. Dillingham, Shannon Jr., and what you get at 17 and what you get at 31. 31 is basically a first-round pick, and there is extreme, my words are all over the place, significant good value in this year's draft, and you're going to get 2 good players at that pick. And that's going to be important to offset some of these finances here. Extension, DiVincenzo is also eligible. He can sign a 3 for 64.5. He's got 2 years left. Team needs, sustainability of the roster. So we talked about development. Dillingham, Shannon Jr., Jalen Clark, another name. The 2 picks in this year's draft. You need Dillingham to develop into a high-level rotational player. That is extremely what you gave up to get him. Extremely, extremely important. Your draft assets, you are outside of this year, you're close to empty as far as what you can, as far as from a tradable standpoint. You owe a ton going out. You can swap your 28, but you have no, outside of that Detroit first you have no pick that you can trade. You can swap in 28. You've got 4 seconds available here. Because you're under that, because you're well under the second apron right now, you are allowed to aggregate contracts. So if a certain player in Phoenix does become available, you will be allowed to aggregate contracts. However, you have to, once you aggregate, you have to stay below the second apron. And if you take back more money, the first apron hard cap is triggered. And I think we're going to do a video on the apron again, because it's kind of a different audience, and just some of the new things we'll talk about probably in the next 2 weeks and stuff like that. So that's it for Minnesota. When you look at it, certainly the Reed and Randall player options, the development of your young players, the likelihood that you will lose Alexander Walker in free agency. That's why you need Shannon Jr., Conley entering the last year of his contract. You need Dillingham. Listen, it's in all, getting to Western Conference Finals is not a disappointing year, and when you lose, but how it ended, I think that is a bit concerning, I would say, just because of, basically the lack of the non-fight in this group is hopefully is a wake-up call here. So that is it for Minnesota Team 27. You go on ESPN.com. We will talk soon. NBA on ESPN.